Allison Grant left her house for a quick trip to the store, a routine she'd done countless times. But within an hour, she was dead. Eric Voss, a man she never spoke to, had been watching her for weeks, planning a perfect crime in broad daylight. What he didn't know was that cameras were watching him too. This is the terrifying true crime story of how a quiet predator was finally exposed, and how one woman's final walk shook an entire town. Allison Grant left her house that afternoon with a grocery list in one hand and her car keys in the other. It was just past 2 o'clock, and the sun was high in the sky. The small town of Brookside buzzed with weekend energy families washing. Cars, kids playing on sidewalks, and neighbors tending to lawns. Nothing felt unusual. Nothing felt dangerous. Allison told her husband she'd be back shortly. Just needed to grab a few things for dinner. She smiled, stepped into her silver hatchback, and pulled out of the driveway. It was the last time Jordan Grant would see his wife alive. The corner store she visited was one she had gone to hundreds of times before. It was a 5-minute drive, surrounded by quiet streets and single-story homes. It wasn't the kind of place where people felt unsafe. The clerk, who knew Allison by name, said she came in just like always, friendly, relaxed, chatting about weekend plans. She bought a carton of eggs, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of juice. At 5:57 p.m., she left the store and stepped outside into the sunlight. Nothing seemed out of place. An hour passed. Jordan texted her to check in. No reply. He tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. At first, he assumed she'd run into a friend or made another quick stop. But when 4 p.m. came and she still wasn't home, a sense of unease crept in. He got into his car and retraced her route to the store. When he arrived, Allison's car was parked where customers usually left their vehicles. There were no visible signs of struggle. Her phone and wallet were inside the vehicle. The groceries she had purchased were still neatly bagged on the front passenger seat. But there was no sign of Allison. Jordan called the police. Officers arrived within minutes and cordoned off the area. A missing persons case was opened immediately, but there were few leads to follow. Security footage from inside the store confirmed the timeline. Outside footage caught her exiting the store and walking to her car. Then she vanished. No screaming, no signs of force, no witnesses. As night fell, search efforts began. Volunteers combed nearby parks, alleyways, and wooded paths. Then, just after sunset, a local jogger made a horrifying discovery: a woman's body in a patch of woods, less than a mile from the store. It was Allison. She had been strangled and left on the ground with her jacket pulled halfway over her shoulders. Her eyes were open. Her face was peaceful, almost as if she were asleep. Brookside, a place where crimes were rare and strangers were few, had just been shaken awake. And the most disturbing part wasn't just that Allison had been murdered, it was that it happened in broad daylight, in a place where everyone thought they were safe. The investigation into Allison Grant's death began with urgency. Detectives needed to reconstruct her final hour, every step, every face, every vehicle that might have crossed her path. They started at the convenience store. It was equipped with 2 internal cameras and 1 external camera above the entrance. The footage was clear and confirmed what was already known. Allison arrived at 2:43 p.m., greeted the clerk, picked up a few items, and paid with a card. At 2:56, she exited the store at 2:57, carrying 2 small bags and walking calmly to her parked car. Nothing about her body language suggested concern or unease. But outside, another detail began to stand out. Roughly 30 seconds after Allison stepped out, a red SUV pulled into the parking lot and parked several spaces down. A man dressed in a dark hoodie stepped out. He didn't enter the store. Instead, He leaned against the vehicle and appeared to scan the area. He stood there for a few moments, watching. Then he started walking not toward the entrance, but in the same direction Allison had gone. A small alley behind the store led to a shortcut locals often used to cut through to the nearby woods and residential streets. Allison used it frequently when traffic made the main route busier. The man followed her down that path. That was the last anyone saw of Allison alive. Police extracted the footage and began enhancing the stills. The man's face was partially obscured by the hoodie, and the SUV had no visible license plate. However, the vehicle's make and model, a red 2010 Chevrolet Trailblazer, gave detectives something to work with. They canvassed the area, speaking to nearby residents and businesses. A breakthrough came from a homeowner just 2 blocks away, who had a security camera facing the street. That camera caught the SUV circling the neighborhood at least twice before Allison arrived at the store. More telling, it captured a clear image of the rear of the SUV before the driver removed the PLATESA license plate number was recovered. The SUV was registered to Eric Voss, a 41-year-old man living in a neighboring town, about 20 miles away. When detectives looked into his background, what they found raised concern. Eric had been fired from 2 previous jobs due to inappropriate behavior toward women, though he had no criminal convictions. HR records documented patterns of obsessive behavior and boundary issues. Detectives also discovered that Eric had recently moved into a small rental property by himself. No close friends, no active social media, and no known connections to Allison. Yet somehow, he had ended up following her down a secluded path in the middle of the day. Police obtained a warrant to search his home. What they were about to find would turn a suspicious case into a chilling and calculated crime. Detectives arrived at Eric Voss's home early in the morning. It was a small, run-down single-story house at the edge of a quiet cul-de-sac. The blinds were shut tight, the grass overgrown, and the red Chevrolet Trailblazer, the same one seen in the surveillance footage, was parked in the driveway. The license plates had been removed, but the VIN confirmed it was the same vehicle. Officers surrounded the property, served the warrant, and began their search inside. The house was dim, cluttered, and unsettling. Rooms were sparsely furnished, and windows were covered with thick blackout curtains. In the living room, investigators noticed a desk covered with old receipts, printed Google Maps directions, and scraps of paper filled with handwritten notes. On closer inspection, the notes detailed times, street names, and brief observations. Several of the entries referenced tag or woman in silver car, along with dates and times that matched Allison Grant's daily routine. In the bedroom, police found a locked drawer containing disturbing items, printed photographs of women taken from a distance, personal notes scribbled in the margins, and 3 photos of Allison. One appeared to have been taken outside her home, another in a grocery store parking lot, and one more near the local library. All were clearly candid, likely taken without her knowledge. Police also recovered a small digital camera and a laptop. The camera's memory card contained dozens of surveillance-style images, many of which matched the women in the printed photos. On the laptop, detectives found a folder labeled Observed. It contained files named with dates and short descriptions. Many of them were detailed logs of Allison's movements, where she parked, how long she stayed in certain stores, what time she left her home. It was clear she had been watched for weeks, maybe even months. In the bathroom, forensic investigators discovered a hoodie soaked in bleach and hastily stuffed behind the washing machine. Traces of blood were found on the fabric, later confirmed to be Allison's. In the trash, police found gloves, duct tape, and zip ties. The combination of items painted a grim picture. This had not been a random act of violence. It had been planned Voss was taken into custody that same day. During interrogation, he claimed ignorance. He said he didn't know Allison, had never seen her before, and didn't know how her blood got on his clothing. But phone records contradicted him. Location data placed his phone near the store and woods at the exact time of the murder. Internet searches on his laptop included phrases like how to remove DNA, how to disable security cameras, and how long does it take to die from strangulation. What emerged was a picture of a man who had lived unnoticed on society's fringes, silently observing, recording, and waiting. He didn't break into homes or steal possessions. He studied patterns, predicted habits, and struck when no one was watching, except this time someone was, and that someone was a security camera. The trial of Eric Voss began 6 months after his arrest. By then, the town of Brookside had changed. People who once left doors unlocked and walked alone at night were now more cautious, more alert. Allison Grant's murder had left a permanent scar on the community. Her face had become a symbol of vulnerability, someone who did everything right, yet fell victim to someone who had been watching in silence. The courtroom was packed on the first day of proceedings. Journalists lined the back wall, and Allison's family sat quietly in the front row, holding photos of her. The prosecution began by laying out the timeline of Allison's last known movements. Surveillance footage was shown again, this time in the courtroom, displaying her final steps from the store to her car and the red SUV pulling into frame moments. Later, the stills of Eric Voss leaving his vehicle and walking in her direction were damning. Witnesses testified, including the neighbor whose doorbell camera had captured the clearest image of the suspect. Vehicle, a digital forensics expert detailed. The mountain of evidence found on Eric's laptop meticulously logged notes about Allison's daily life, along with internet searches that showed clear planning. Forensic specialists confirmed that the blood found on the hoodie hidden in Eric's home was a match to Allison's. The defense attempted to argue mental instability. They painted Eric as a man with deep emotional trauma and poor mental health, suggesting that he was incapable of understanding the consequences of his actions. They claimed he had no intention to kill and that the event was a spontaneous act of confusion. But the evidence of stalking, planning, and the tools found in his possession said otherwise. The prosecution focused on intent. They brought out the rope, gloves, and duct tape recovered from Eric's trash. These weren't signs of a spontaneous act, they were signs of preparation. They emphasized the handwritten logs and the chilling detail with which Eric had documented Allison's habits. A psychologist testified that while Eric might have had personality disorders, he was fully aware of right and wrong. The attack was not a moment of confusion. It was a calculated ambush. When it came time for closing arguments, the prosecution left the jury with a final image: Allison's smiling face captured on security footage. Just minutes before her life ended, they reminded the jury that Allison had never even spoken to Eric, had no idea he existed, and had no chance to escape once he decided to act. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and unlawful stalking. Eric Voss showed no emotion as the sentence was read: life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of quiet sobs from Allison's family. Justice had been served, but no verdict could erase the pain of her loss. Brookside would never forget the woman who just went into the store and never came home. After the trial concluded, the story of Allison Grant didn't fade from memory, it grew louder. Her death had become a rallying point, not just for her family, but for an entire community shaken to its core. News outlets continued covering the case. Documentaries were produced. and her name became part of broader conversations about personal safety, modern surveillance, and the unseen threats that often go unnoticed in everyday life. Allison's husband, Jordan, took the grief that nearly broke him and used it to fuel a mission. Alongside her parents and close friends, he launched the Allison's Watch Foundation, aimed at educating people about stalking, raising awareness about personal safety habits, and promoting neighborhood watch efforts in small towns. He spoke at schools, community centers, and police-led outreach events, urging people not to dismiss their gut feelings or the small, strange behaviors that can sometimes indicate deeper danger. The foundation gained national attention. Victims of stalking and harassment came forward, sharing stories that had long remained silent. People found strength in Allison's story not because it had a happy ending, but because it gave voice to fears so many had been taught to ignore. Laws around stalking and surveillance were re-evaluated in several counties, and funding for victim support services increased across the state. In Brookside, changes were immediate. The town installed additional street cameras in vulnerable areas, improved lighting along paths and alleyways, and held quarterly safety meetings where residents could report anything suspicious. A new walking trail was built in memory of Allison, lined with solar-powered lights and marked by a stone plaque near its entrance that read, "In memory of Allison Grant, may your final steps light the way for others." The impact of the case also reached law enforcement. Detectives involved in the investigation began using the case to train new officers on the importance of pattern analysis, digital forensics, and community surveillance. The doorbell footage that initially led to Eric Voss's capture was highlighted in national seminars. Police departments started encouraging homeowners to register their home cameras with optional community watch databases, which allowed for quicker access during active investigations. Meanwhile, Eric Voss remained in prison, serving a life sentence. He never appealed, never offered a confession, and never showed remorse. Psychological evaluations described him as emotionally detached and manipulative, someone who had learned to observe life rather than live it. In letters written from prison, he attempted to justify his actions with convoluted logic and delusional reasoning, none of which ever made it into public record. As the years passed, the Grant family learned how to live with the silence Allison left behind. Her absence was felt every day, in every photo, every holiday, every routine that used to include her. But they also witnessed how her story became a light for others. How a woman who simply went to the store ended up changing how people think about safety, community, and the quiet shadows we sometimes ignore. Allison's death had been senseless, but what came after ensured she would never be forgotten.